Cheers. Welcome to Culture Night.
Where each week we drink fancy wine and watch movies that are in some way culturally significant. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Sarah, and we are back for the season finale of season 3. This is season 3, episode 9, I believe.
Our last musical
for a while. We have just scratched the surface. So
this season kept growing and growing. I think there's a lot more that we still want to see, but I kind of need a little bit of a change up for musicals after this week.
Yeah, that's the hard part is I feel like once I'm in the genre, I'm like, oh, but like we should watch this and we should watch this. And I have learned this, so I want to see what this pans out. But also I can't watch the same genre every single week. It gets tiring. So
yeah, definitely need a little bit of variety, but I do love how we've gotten into these seasons where we've got some continuity. But
yes, I think it has made the learning experience of Culture Night much better to have that.
Yeah. And just kind of being able to plan ahead a little bit instead of each week sitting down and saying, which movie from the entire universe of movies are we going to pick tonight?
Do you remember the stress of that?
It's a lot. At least now we kind of pick out and say, okay, thematically, here's our few we want to pick from.
Yes, but we are still taking suggestions. So I guess we'll jump into podcast with all of this season finale stuff. So this is the season 3 finale. And with that, we are going to be taking a little bit of a break.
Mm-hmm. We have gone over 6 months with no breaks in our release schedule. There's been one every single, I guess, Wednesday, right?
Yep. I guess they come out Thursday at midnight.
Thursday midnight.
Every Wednesday this year,
yes,
we have watched a movie, or at least every week. Sometimes it's Thursday or sometimes it's over two nighs. We don't get too specific with that.
When we started this podcast, we wanted to commit to doing 6 straight months or at least 26 straight weeks of episodes, just so that we didn't do 3 or 4 episodes and quit, or do what most people do and do like 7 or 8 and quit. So we've got a far way into this and we don't plan on stopping for good. We just kind of need like a 2 or 3 week break to kind of reset and,
And so I have time to not be editing podcasts all day long. And by all day long, I mean in the 3 minutes of time I get between when I get asked questions or needed for something from our kids.
So you won't see an episode for a couple weeks, but don't worry, we are not going away and we are very excited for next season.
Yes. So with that, do you want to jump in and tell everybody what our next season theme is?
Next season's theme is going to be sci-fi.
Yeah, so season 4, we are coming back with sci-fi movies. We kind of have brainstormed a little bit of a list, but if you are a big sci-fi fan, I'm sure all the musical lovers that are tuning into our podcasts are raging with suggestions for sci-fi. But if you have any suggestions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube, or to email us at culturenightpod@gmail.com, or
reach out on Instagram.
Yeah, message us on Instagram, comment on any of our posts. We are more than welcome for ideas. Sometimes we get kind of stuck in a tunnel of one rabbit hole.
Yeah, based on how this is going to line up too, I think that we would like it if we could overlap some of the sci-fi with the fact that it's about to be spooky season.
Ooh.
But we might have a couple bonus episodes throughout the season, kind of like we did this season when we threw Barbie and Oppenheimer into it. But we might throw a couple spooky season movies in there, but we might try to line them up so that it's a sci-fi and spooky season.
Spooky sci-fi?
Yeah. If we can pull that off. So we're still figuring out our list. So again, hit us up with suggestions and we might just fit those in.
And stay tuned to see what season 4 brings us. And also make sure you're staying checked in on YouTube and on Instagram, because we will be posting when we will be coming back from our break and
posting some shorts, reels and whatever they're called.
And that's way you can also keep up with what we will be watching next once we decide what our first movie of season 4 will be. So stay tuned, and we look forward to next season.
Yeah. So that's, I think, all the podcast business we probably have, right?
Yeah.
So with that, let's move on to what are we drinking this week?
The most important part of the podcast. This week we are drinking the 2019 Fat Boy Zinfandel from Tobin James. We did a Fat Boy Zinfandel recently, 3 or 4 episodes ago.
Yeah, it has a very fun description on it.
Yes, it does.
Let's go ahead and give it our thoughts first. A lot of berry right on the nose.
We talked about this before. It just has that really good smell and aroma of a good crafted winery wine. Like what I come to expect from going to a tasting room.
Yeah, that craft and like wine, it's like, it doesn't taste like it's just kind of like generic red wine. You kind of taste like, oh, this is actually made from something.
It's layered. Got a little, like, you smell something and then it kind of morphs into something else.
Definitely get some raisin sweetness right there.
Yeah, and
a big change up from the gushers of last week.
It is. It also had like almost like a tingly spice on the tongue as I was swallowing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know what else I'm getting from it. It's not really sweet, besides like the little bit of raisin flavor that I get from the top.
It has
it's not
like
quite alcohol forward, but
no, it has like fall spices, not necessarily cinnamon, but like I don't know if currant is one, plum maybe, just some of that like cozier tasting stuff.
yeah, I'm looking to see if there's any really tasty notes, but it just kind of talks about how it's a slightly obnoxious, big, brash, always enjoyed, always loved wine. So,
well, I'm enjoying it so far.
Yep. And we'll give our thoughts, obviously, after the movie.
Stay tuned. All right, now it is time to jump into Behind the Screens, where each week we go behind the big screens of Hollywood and look into some aspect of film production or storytelling. Ooh,
You almost had that one.
I shredded that up a little bit.
Yeah, you're too busy looking at me.
I know I was, sorry.
So this week we are exploring Eastman color, which is something we heard of last week, and I said that I wanted to dive more into that. So there's some quick follow-up there. I was kind of concerned that it was going to be pretty straightforward, or just like, this is another name or the name brand of Technicolor. It turns out I started going down the rabbit hole pretty quickly on it.
You had a cute little smile on your face while you were reading about it.
Yeah, there's so it is not quite the name brand of a process, but a lot of companies did end up putting their own name on top of Eastman color. Eastman color was invented by Eastman Kodak for obviously colorizing films, but a bunch of film companies created their own branded version of it called Deluxe Color, Warner Color, Metro Color, Panther Color, Columbia Color, others obviously. And I think it was all very much the same thing, just they wanted to have their own unique aspect on the movie poster or label, whatever, to say this was a different process, but it was really the same thing. So the big difference between it and Technicolor is with Technicolor, as I guess you researched, it was 3 film strips essentially. They kind of combined with various chemical processes to make the various colors and bring those things out. With Eastman color, it was a single strip.
Ooh.
So had the advantage of obviously making it a much simpler capture process and a different developing process. There were actually 2 processes, and I couldn't really figure out the difference between the 2 off my late research because the Wikipedia pages were almost identical between the 2. There was Eastman color positive and Eastman color negative, and the Wikipedia pages for the 2 were like 90% identical.
Interesting.
The main thing between the difference that I could tell was that Eastman color positive had no mask when developing it, whereas Eastman color negative had an orange mask that was used. And Eastman color positive, I believe, was used more for like high quality film production, whereas negative, it said, was used for high volume film, and I guess did not have consistent quality. So I guess if you were filming something that was not meant necessarily for like film or the big screen, you just needed some film produced, you would use the Eastman color negative, and that would give you a faster, cheaper, easier process, but not necessarily the high quality that you might expect from a full film production. I don't really know the difference between the negative and positive aspect of it because they didn't really go into that, but it seems like it's just kind of just 2 very similar but slightly different processes for bringing the color out. So moving on, the colors that are big movies that we have heard of that were made with Eastman color that I recognize off of the list at least were Oklahoma, which I guess I don't remember seeing Eastman color on that. Because we saw Technicolor, obviously, but I guess we weren't looking for it then.
It wasn't that many episodes ago, but that was also like 2 months ago at this point.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
And now we're learning, so we'll probably pick up on these things as we see more movies. Jurassic Park, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and A Clockwork Orange were some of the big films that I at least recognize off the list that were produced with Eastman color. Then while I was doing the research, I came across a really cool Britannica article by Martin Scorsese.
Ooh.
Where he was discussing Eastman color and in particular how brittle it was. Ooh. So he said Technicolor was much more stable than Eastman color, and because of that, as films started being produced with Eastman color, they started actually losing films and realizing that it was breaking down and causing what they called vinegar syndrome, where the film would guess become kind of yellowed, start smelling like vinegar, and just basically start degrading. And
yikes!
Yeah, and so he's doing all this research and finding out that all these, like a ton of movies, not just these more modern ones that are being created, were also deteriorating. And he found out that 50% of movies pre-50s, including movies that won multiple Oscars and were just, well known and loved, had been lost forever. They just had been broken down. They lost the film. It just
Yikes.
either in fires or this vinegar syndrome or other things just lost them, which is so tragic.
Yeah, that's like, it feels silly how like heartbreaking that is. But man, that like hurts to hear.
Yeah, it's terrifying, and we don't think of those things today because almost everything is archived back up to 100 different times, that it's hard to think that these big things that were so culturally significant, winning all these Oscars, that you just can't find them anymore. So he actually created a film foundation in 1990 along with Woody Allen, Francis Ford Coppola, Stanley Kubrick, George Lucas, Sidney Pollack, Robert Redford, and Steven Spielberg, to basically go around and start preserving a lot of these films and developing processes for taking films that were basically on the verge of being lost or maybe had slightly been lost if not for this intervention, to come up with a process to not remaster them, but just restore them. And for the most part, a lot of it is done chemically, but later in the late 90s, after 96, he said a lot of these were restored digitally, which was kind of good and bad. More that like with digital, you're not really going to lose them. They're not going to degrade as if you would just kind of basically put on a new film that's also going to have a lifetime. But you'd also lose a lot of the actual benefits of film that we've kind of talked about in the past for being able to remaster these things. But it's always better to have something than nothing. So if they're not going to be constantly going through and making sure the films are preserved indefinitely, then at least you have them digitally. And I have seen, I didn't find this in this article, maybe I mentioned it later, but I have seen there's like places in the world, like deep in salt caves, that they'll take a lot of big, movies and digital things that they need to be backed up forever and put them deep in these salt caves, because basically no bacteria, nothing really goes on down there.
Interesting.
And so nothing really degrades, and they're obviously safe from all sorts of various like calamities and whatnot as well. So I think a lot of those are like not really well known, the location, for obvious reasons, but I think now there's a much better or much higher priority for preserving a lot of at least culturally significant things like movies that tragically were lost.
That's so crazy. I've been going through lots of old family photos lately, and I've found lots and lots of film negatives, which was something that I thought I would stop seeing and never see again back in like 2000. And they're just like family photos that I can imagine just having to be so fragile and careful with movies, which play such a big part of culture.
Imagine like finding like a film reel of like some like really cool movie and then opening up and it's just like dust or disintegrated, and how like heartbreaking that would be.
Oh my God. Oh, I can't even, I'm such a sucker for preserving things that, that just breaks me to my core.
Yeah. So PSA, everyone, take all your VHSs, get them backed up now, because they're not going to get any better quality than they are now.
That's for sure. All right. Do you have anything else to add about that?
No, that was it. I feel like I probably could have researched that for a lot longer, because it was just, I started going down that rabbit hole, but a lot cooler than I thought it was originally going to be.
I mean, if we really had more time and more energy, we could make a spin-off of podcast that was all behind the screens.
Just called Behind the Screens.
But we don't have time and we don't have energy, so you'll just have to stick
with
with
We don't have Patreons, unfortunately. In that we don't have any Patreons because we're not on Patreon. But the biggest thing, obviously, is time, yes.
Yes. So, but thank you. That's all very interesting. And I know, like you said, we'll definitely see those logos and things popping up as we watch movies going forward. So very cool. All right, now it's time to jump into Slept on It. Last week we watched the movie Once from 2007. You rated it a 6.6 and I rated it a 6.1. How does your score change after sleeping on it?
I think I'm going to actually bump it up to a 6.8. I think sleeping on it, I obviously loved the movie before, and I had just recently, before we rewatched it, I found out the whole aspect of her being so young, and it kind of was like a little off-putting. But then after we watched the movie, hearing some more about the background and hearing Glenn talking on the off-camera, whatever, YouTube series.
God, what's it called? Is it off camera?
I think it's off the camera or something. It's like the black and white YouTube series. Hearing him talk about the movie and the production of it just gave me a little more appreciation to how it like almost didn't happen, and then
how it just came to be in general, just all the bits and pieces.
And originally it was going to be Cillian Murphy. He didn't make this movie to basically be
stealing
like, I'm going to
behind the scenes
this,
facts.
Well, that he didn't make this movie to say, I'm going to make this movie just so this young girl has to be my love interest. It was not meant to be that way. So it makes me appreciate it a little bit more. So I think I can bump it up to a 6.8.
Yes, I am also going to go up. I think I will go 6.6. I'll steal your old score.
All right.
Yeah. Again, the points, everything's made up and the points don't matter here.
100%.
But I can make cases anyway.
These points just make us feel better.
That's it. Oh man, yeah. I will say 6.6, learning a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. And just the more we talked about it in the podcast and while I was listening to it back and editing it, and just how much we appreciated the art of how the movie was made and the way it was shot, and just that everything was so intentional and it was very beautifully done in an artistic way, that I have to bump it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
The actual story is okay.
Music, fantastic.
Songs I don't know it well enough to be at a fantastic yet.
I used to listen to the soundtrack on repeat.
They are good. And I like them because they are songs that you would hear on the radio, or that are not like, this is a musical song. It is kind of, especially because we were teenagers in 2007. So stuff that we would listen to, like, I like that aspect of it. It felt a little bit more natural with the way the songs were in, and it wasn't like we're going to stop what we're talking about to sing a song about what's going to happen next. Like, I liked that aspect of it.
Yeah, it definitely felt more like the music made sense and fit more than just like it's a story and something everyone's singing and no one's remarking on it. This was like, hey, we're singing together, and this is a natural thing to do
because we're supposed to be
for musicians.
Yeah. So with that, I will jump into my deep dive behind the scenes facts from the movie. We talked last week about how this movie is rated R, and we were not sure why it was rated R because it seemed pretty mild in almost all ways, but apparently it was rated R exclusively for language. Which
I guess there were some F-bombs there, but didn't seem over the top.
And maybe because we're like in our 30s now and cursing isn't like as big of a deal as it used to be when we were like 12, and we just don't notice it.
Yeah.
But apparently,
I guess there is a limit of like how many like of certain curse words you can say before you get pumped up to PG-13 or R, and I guess they just didn't care.
Yeah. So just for language. So if you're chill with language around your children, I'd say it's a relatively tame story.
Also, their accents are so thick you probably won't even really realize it.
Yep. If you're just listening to it, no closed captions, you won't even know. Do you want to tell the award story?
Oh, yeah. I think I'd mentioned it in the last episode where Glenn and Marquetta had won the Oscar, I think so. Best Musical. And they go up there and Glenn gives a quick little speech and suddenly starts walking off the stage, and they play the walk-off music, not realizing that she wanted to say something. She kind of started leaning towards the microphone, and it was kind of awkward because she goes like, oops, and just kind of like walks away. And then when they went to break, I guess when they came back, Jon Stewart, the host of the awards that night, called her back out to come give her quick little speech and actually get her time to shine, her moment, because she also was obviously a huge part of the movie and the making of it. So, and
her speech was very beautiful. Like, it wasn't super over the top and thanking 8 jillion specific people. It was very heartfelt. And Glenn did give more of a speech than just the thanks.
Yeah, I could have sworn he gave like a really quick, short one, but I can't imagine how nerve-wracking it would have been to go back out there after having been embarrassed and not being able to say something. Especially
because she doesn't seem like a super like bold out there kind of person. She seems like someone who is like so thankful to even be there and like just.
I mean, I can see more her character having done that, but as a person, she just didn't seem like she had that. But maybe obviously don't know her as a person. She does have that
close personal friends over here.
I don't care that it was weird. I'm going to go back out there because I had my speech and I'm going to say it.
So. Just to clarify, we had most of the facts right, but we did go back and watch it, and
now we know.
And now we know. Thank you. My next fact is you mentioned Cillian Murphy was supposed to play the guy, and they had kind of written a lot of it with him in mind, and then schedules ended up not working out, and the director had to really convince Glenn to play the part of Guy, and he seemed really against it, and I think it's better that he was Guy. Although the age difference is weird, you don't really notice it too much unless you're really, really looking for it or looking on Wikipedia like we were during it. And I feel like
the beard kind of helps somewhat mask it, and
he's just like so Irish, and just he's so street performer Irish guy. I can't really imagine it.
Which I also love. I don't think I realized it until we watched it this time that they don't have a name in this. I guess first time I watched the movie, I saw what the actors' names were, and I just figured that they went by their first name or something similar. I love movies where characters just never get a name, like the waitress.
Yeah, I thought that was a good play.
Sorry, like the waitress from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
I was like, it's not a movie, but
yeah.
My next note is on that same note where Glenn kind of had to be pulled into doing it because he was not an actor and he was not out there trying to be the star in this movie. A lot of the movie was actually improvised because they didn't want the movie to feel too scripted. And Marquetta is apparently not an actress either. And they were concerned about it feeling really stiff and not natural. So they kind of gave him guidelines. And most of the movie is, in fact, improvised, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it comes off really well. It doesn't seem any more awkward than two people would just generally be awkward. Especially having just met each other and playing music in front of each other and all that. And
I think we talked about last week too, is it felt like a really relatable story. Am I a street singer in Ireland? No. Am I a person that, met somebody and fell in love with them? Yeah. Do I follow that exact script? No. But do I see that natural coming together story that they had? 100%.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that ties into it too with the whole guy girl thing. You just kind of can. Could
be any guy, any
I
girl.
can kind of see myself, or I know someone that's like that. You can kind of fit anybody you want into that story in your mind. And although it was mostly improvised, the songs and the scripts were written at the same time. So I guess like the general story of the script was written, and then he worked really closely with Glenn to write the songs. So it wasn't like, oh, here's a bunch of songs and let's write a story about it. Because I think we kind of talked about it. I don't know what we were talking about specifically last week of how the songs and the story fit together, but they were written together, and it wasn't like, here's my album I wrote, write a story around this.
Yeah, I definitely thought it had been more of like, here's some of my songs from my band, and I want to make it into a musical, and they just happen to fit, but it does make more sense. They were kind of making these with the movie and the script in mind. Sure.
And then my last note is kind of like we talked about, it is a very raw, underproduced visually movie, and it was mostly shot without any permits. They did no lighting, no production designers, no wardrobe, no paid extras, no location scouts, no production trailers, just a tiny crew using natural light and a couple of Sony HD cameras.
Filmed it in 2 hours.
It was not like they had a lot of the behind the screens people that we've talked about. Those people were not there. It was a very small crew.
To see if they had like a best boy and all that sort of stuff on that the credits list, and I did not see that. And
so like, reading all of that and thinking about, especially knowing what we know from all the behind the screen stuff of what it takes sometimes to put these movies together, it goes back to, wow, I really appreciate this movie that they just went out there and did it.
Yeah.
And it's great.
Yeah. Definitely worked way better than it should have, given the, the lack of all the other things that go into movie making that we've talked about, for sure.
Yeah. So that was once. That will probably not be the once time we saw it. You have me influenced with all your jokes.
I don't know what you're talking about. That's weird that you like doing puns.
Okay. Anyways, and with that, we will close the door on once, and we'll move into what we are watching tonight. What are we watching?
Tonight we are watching Hamilton from 2020.
Would it really be a pop culture podcast if we didn't talk about Hamilton?
Yeah, we have seen it before. We're not quite the 3 years too late, but it is rated PG-13. And actually, let's now hop into our time machine and head back to 2020.
So the musical itself came out in 2018, I believe, and it was released onto Disney Plus as a quote unquote film into 2020.
Yeah, they obviously have been performing it since before 2020, obviously. So back in 2020, obviously a weird year for everyone and
the most
everything.
Bumping year in social life ever.
The top 3 movies released that year were Bad Boys for Life, grossing $204 million, 1917, grossing $157 million, and Sonic the Hedgehog, grossing $146 million. And it's interesting because the movies were released in January of 2020, December of 2019, and February of 2020. Because
the whole top 20, I believe. I mean, it was way down the list before you got something that was released in maybe November or August. Almost all of the top lists were released between maybe like November, December of 2019 and March of 2020. It was really wild to look at.
Yeah. And for obvious reasons, COVID-19 shutting down all of the movie theaters everywhere and everything kind of going to streaming and not being counted in the same way. It is interesting. These numbers do seem a lot lower than the like the 2007 era ones that we had seen. It seemed like almost half of those numbers.
It was a weird time.
The top 3 songs released that year were Blinding Lights by The Weeknd, Circles by Post Malone, and The Box by Roddy Ricch.
I know the first two. I've not heard the third one.
Me neither, but maybe it's one of those ones that just like you hear and you never like look at it on the radio to see what
It's
it
not like
is.
we were driving around a lot in our cars in 2020 to
True.
listen
Just
to
kind of
the
hanging
radio.
out, watching reruns of everything that's all that was really out there.
Oh, man. Again, what a time.
What a time to be alive, for sure.
I will say it's been really interesting the last, or I guess with Barbie and Oppenheimer and this, doing a couple movies that came out in the 2020s and doing the top songs in the top movies, and just how much of a different mental exercise that is than being like, oh, like, let's go back in the time machine is like, oh, like going back to high school or going back to before we were born. And this is like a couple of years
I
ago.
also just listen to less music now. So that the top songs back in like 2004 to 2012, I knew them a lot better than these songs from the 2020 on. I listened to mostly podcasts, like when I'm in the car and not really listening to stuff when I'm in the stores and all that. So it's interesting seeing some of these and be like, this was like 2 years ago. I really should know this song.
But also 2020 is the year we became parents. So I also feel like just not only did the world shut down in 2020, but like social life for a little bit. And like,
And we started listening to more like Cocomelon than the radio too.
yes, my Spotify hits of the year are Cocomelon and Disney.
Yeah, definitely different lifestyle. So back to Hamilton. Have you seen it before?
Yes, we did watch it.
Together.
Honestly, I think it was that weekend that it was released. It was released around 4th of July weekend in 2020. I think we watched it that weekend.
I was excited to watch it then because I knew people had talked about how it was so hard to get tickets and it was so great and wonderful, and everyone that had seen it loved the soundtrack and was obsessed with it. So I was really excited to see it. I think
I was over it. Hot take. I didn't hate it. I just don't think I really get it. And maybe I've grown to appreciate Lin-Manuel Miranda a lot more. Thank you, Moana and Encanto, for bringing him deeper into my life. And I think everybody was just like so obsessed. And after a while of just hearing people talk about stuff, you kind of get over it, or at least I do. And I was just kind of like, I don't know. And the fact that there is no dialogue, it is all singing. Maybe there's like one or two spoken lines, but it's like kind of rap.
I was gonna say it's more
like,
closer to rap, like just really fast paced talking almost.
That's not really my jam, especially for 2 hours and 40 minutes, whatever it is. That was exhausting.
I mean, I can see that. It's almost like 2.5 hours of Schoolhouse Rock type thing, where it's just kind of like you're learning about politics in a slightly rappy, fun type of way. It is obviously a bit more than that, but I can see how that can kind of like be exhausting. I remember finding it fascinating and finding a lot of the songs really, really catchy, but
yes, I'm hoping to, now that at least the original hype of it being out and available is over and I'm a little more far removed from it, that I will enjoy it more this time. I will say I'm not super stoked about the long run time. That's also a quick way for me to be like, I don't know how I feel about this, but I am excited to see it again. And again, I really think most of my excitement is for Lin-Manuel Miranda. Just he's become so much more a part of our daily life in Kanto.
I think having seen a lot of his movies now, I see a lot more of his fingerprints on a lot of his
style.
Yeah, a lot of the songs especially. So I think with that, let's go ahead and hop right in.
Yeah, Hamilton. Ready?
Cheers.
Cheers. We're back. That was Hamilton.
Yeah. That was a long movie.
Yikes.
I really want to know the word count on this, especially compared to like other movies of similar lengths. I just feel like they must blow it out of the water. It's just
Well, why don't you just stick around for
some fun facts afterwards?
Fun facts, yes.
Oh, can't
so
wait.
To start this off, we're just going to go ahead and preface this by saying that this was a weird week. We did our pre-roll on Wednesday like normal, and then his mom wanted to come watch it with us, but we couldn't watch it with her until Friday. And then we had family stuff all weekend, and this movie is so dang long that we were not starting a podcast at 11 o'clock at night when we finished it. So
this is the following Monday. It's been a couple days. We've kind of slept on it. So this will be a combination. So
we have our notes from the movie. We will give our first impression scores. And then we've also done some research, looked up some stuff. We'll have us slept on it score as well.
Awesome.
So let's start with our regular notes.
Yep. So let's start with the wine scale, which is a 0 to 10 scale. 10 being like very good wine. 0 doesn't necessarily mean that it is a bad wine because all the wines we drink on this show are very good wines. So a low score does not necessarily mean that it is a bad wine. We're just trying to rate these kind of relative to each other. So that being said, this wine, the Fat Boy, I'm going to rate a 4.2.
I gave it a 5. And I think I gave it a 5 for similar reasons why you gave it a 4.2.
Yeah, it just didn't do much for me. I feel like the last Fat Boy we had was a lot better and had a lot more to it. And this one just didn't really develop, and it was
it felt okay to me like I gave it an even 5 because it was a solid wine. Like I still thought it was good. It did not open up anymore. It did not get any better. It was just kind of stayed very consistently the same. And I feel like that has a lot of value. So I had to give it a...
Yeah, but with all the label on the back saying how like big and bold and everything it was, I'm like, I just feel like it was very muted relative to its description.
And maybe it's because it's not aged as much as our other ones have.
Yeah, we're just used to some really old, unwell-aged wines. That's our palate now.
Yes, but I mean, I thought it was solid. It was not anything crazy to write home from. I've had a lot better wines.
Yeah, this was the 2019. Yeah, 2019 Fat Boys in Vidal. I think previous years were better from the Fat Boys that we've had. So
we'll see what the 2020 bottle has to bring. I'm sure we'll get one soon.
Yeah. Now that we have more of these to compare to, it's interesting to kind of, check back and be like, oh, I liked this year of this wine better than this year of this wine, which is... And
that we've been keeping track of all our scores too. Makes it more fun.
Makes us feel like very fancy wine sommeliers. No, not even close. Right. So moving on to the movie rating out of 10. I'll let you go first for this one.
My first impression, movie's over. I have to give it a score. Number was a 4.8.
Yeah, I give it a 6.2. It's good. It didn't really feel as much like a movie, and it's definitely not something that like I'm gonna want to sit down and be like, oh, nothing going on tonight. Let me go ahead and just like pick out Hamilton again. It's a lot to commit to.
The length was a big.
You can't just kind of like. I guess if you wanted to, you could just kind of listen to the background and listen to songs, but it's not like most musicals where there's like a bunch of like very distinct songs. It all kind of flows together a lot. That it's kind of hard to process that way. It is good. The storyline is good.
But the storyline's also hard to follow we had the captions on. So I feel like I missed so much of the visual experience. Yes, we have seen it once before. But I'm so busy reading the words because there are so many words and trying to follow the story and piece together all the people. It's hard to follow if you don't really know the story going into it. Yeah.
I like the premise. It was really cool seeing it, especially some of these people like Lin-Manuel Miranda that we don't usually see acting, seeing some of the other big actors in this singing and everything was very good. It's a lot to take in.
I agree. It also kind of gave me similar feelings to Oppenheimer, where I think also because they're truly historical, like based on events that actually happened, that there was a lot of characters who don't really look like the people. Not that I know what Alexander Hamilton looks like off of the top of my head. I know he is on Money, but I mean, a lot of these characters, I don't have a face to put to the name. And so kind of trying to be like, okay, he's this person, tracking this, while also trying to follow the story.
Well, and they also come back as different characters, the same actors that I feel like.
And this was also long like Oppenheimer too. That I think I felt a lot of similarities watching this. I felt the same way.
Yeah, the same note that I made in Oppenheimer of I really could have used like a little badge underneath the person when they're introduced of like their name, so I could like literally see their name written out with their picture. And like maybe have that a couple times, honestly.
Or even like, like a video game where how they have the little like circles that follow the players around, like just like the name that popped up on the screen. So we knew who was who.
It's 2023, but I feel like we should be able to watch these and kind of have like a little Sims type thing, a logo over them to kind of follow them around.
Yes, 100%.
Their name. Yeah. Cause it is just so many characters and they're all talking so fast. And then by the time you figure out who someone is, suddenly they're a different character because their previous character died, and it's a lot.
Yeah. I feel the same way.
But now let's, I guess, go into the movie description.
Go for it.
This follows the adult life mostly of Alexander Hamilton and how he came to be involved in the Revolutionary War and being involved with the founding of our country and all the events leading up to his death as a musical on Broadway.
According to the TV, this movie is presenting the tale of American founding father Alexander Hamilton. This filmed version of the original Broadway smash hit is the story of America then, told by America now. That's an interesting take on it. You know that, but seeing it spelled out like that. America then, told by America now. I like that.
So was the movie what you expected?
Yes, we've seen it before.
Yes. I will say the first time I saw it, I really didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if this was going to be an actual like historical retelling of Alexander Hamilton, or whether it was going to be kind of one of these like alternate like musical changing like, or Alexander Hamilton in like modern times with modern music and like some of these weird like musical kind of things you see, or these weird movies like the it's the Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter or something movie they made like a couple years ago. Yeah. Just some really weird out there movies. So I hadn't really listened to all the people that were raving about how much they liked Hamilton, because I just didn't really care, because I wasn't going to go see it on Broadway. That given the chance to see it on TV, I had almost no context the first time I watched it, and was pleasantly surprised with how like it was telling me like historical stories of a founding father that we never really hear much about, besides a couple of notes like throughout the when you're learning about like the Constitutional Convention maybe, and the fact that he dies. I'd learned nothing about his involvement with the actual war itself or anything.
Yeah, I, like most of America, didn't know much, if anything, about him. Learned a lot. It was pretty much what I expected. I'd heard parts of the soundtrack before. I don't think I realized there was no dialogue in it going into it the first time. But this time around, I knew what was coming for me.
Yeah. How well did it age? Well, it's only 3 years old.
Yeah.
Don't think there's been any crazy drama with it. It's a period piece again. So yeah,
I mean, these musicals, well. period piece. Or really, are all movies period pieces?
In a way, but some of them I think are trying to tell the modern times like in their own words versus something we've had a while to process it, and we're telling something that there's a general consensus on what actually happened at that point. Yeah. Could this movie be made today? I mean, probably. I mean, it was made in 2016, technically came out in 2020, but I think they're still performing it.
Yeah, still performing it. So
for sure. Did they say the title of the movie in the movie? Yes.
Yes.
They said Hamilton quite a bit.
Yes.
I don't have a count on it, but it was quite a lot. Yeah. Probably up there.
Much like Oppenheimer. And we've had a bunch.
Yeah. Some movies that are like Forrest Gump, movies that are named after people. It's up there pretty high. Does the title fit the movie?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what else we would call it besides like founding father or something like that, but.
Or if they had some way to kind of tie in like hip hop Hamilton, or, I mean.
Ooh, kind of like that. Hip hop Hamilton.
I was not necessarily going for that for being the real title, but, having some kind of modern, like it says, America Now, a twist on adding that like current feel to the title. But.
No, I'm going to make a campaign now for everyone to start referring to this as hip hop Hamilton.
I'm sorry I said that out loud. I was trying to describe something more.
So well, though.
Okay.
Were there any actors that went on to do bigger things?
Well, I think a lot of them were pretty established theater actors already.
And I guess it depends if you look at this as 2020 versus 2016 when it was filmed. So I think after 2016, I think Lin-Manuel Miranda obviously
has really blown up,
become quite the big like movie writer, musical writer since then.
He'd already, I don't know his full involvement, but he, I believe, created the musical In the Heights, which is also fairly popular. I do not know anything about that. That's hopefully a next season movie for our next musical season movie.
Jonathan Groff had already done a whole lot of things. But he'd been on Glee, obviously Frozen, Mindhunter, a whole bunch of things.
And I know Renee Goldsberry, who plays Angelica. She was on the soap opera I used to watch growing up, and I think she's been in some other stuff. I also believe Philippa Sue is really big on Broadway. Daveed Diggs was in Wonder.
Yeah.
So
yeah, some of these guys have done big things or had done big things by then. It's kind of hard to kind of judge that and remember what. Yeah.
But they're also, I don't think any of them are big movie actors like that we will see a lot going forward. I think most of them are theater actors, because obviously this was a recording of a theater production, not a movie. Yeah,
definitely. What impact do you think this movie had on pop culture? Well, everyone who saw it in theaters, at least, or like in the theater, at least could not stop talking about it.
Everybody that saw it in the in the actual theater, everyone that was able to see the movie. I mean, I feel like, it was almost like we're the Taylor Swift era that we're in now, where people just are like hyper fixated on these things, and like getting tickets is impossible. And I don't know, we're not the kind of people that are gonna like fight tooth and nail to get tickets to go to a theater. Not really our thing. But yeah, I think it was a sensation, and I appreciate the idea of telling it in a more modern way, using using what the people today enjoy and appreciate to tell a story and make it an easier way to connect on. Not for me.
Yeah. And tying into that into the do you feel culture after watching it, it's more like, I feel like everyone saw this, especially in July of 2020 when this came out, or June, I guess July 3rd. Like everyone saw it because it was just like there was nothing else to do. And I think, like, as my mom said after watching it with us, she's like, oh, now I feel cool having watched it because like everyone, just was watching this at the time. So it's kind of like a culturally significant event, especially in the fact that it's just what everyone who was stuck at home, nothing to do, had heard all about Hamilton or had seen it and couldn't wait to see it again and wanted to see it, was watching Hamilton.
Agreed.
So I feel like it's kind of similar to people like, crowding around the TV back in like the, before we had streaming and everything on demand. It was like, oh, if you wanted to watch something, everyone's watching at the same time. Yeah. And almost the same thing here of everyone stuck at home doing this.
Spending 2 hours and 40 minutes of their time watching this. Well, we had nothing better to do.
Yep.
All right. Would you like to go first or you want me to go first?
I will go first.
All right, go for it.
So my first note was that it started out like it's a rap battle, like it's 1997. Like I feel like just the beginning and how they're all kind of like, talking really fast and kind of making this like hip hop vibe on it was just what everything was doing back in like the mid to late 90s. Like everything was just, a rap version of this, a rap of that. And like they start out with their first song. It's just, and it honestly goes almost the whole movie of like that same, like kind of like Schoolhouse Rock type style, like rock or rap type thing, the whole time.
Well, I didn't actually write this down in one of my notes to share, but in all of my research about the movie since we've watched it, apparently Lin-Manuel Miranda read the biography of Alexander Hamilton and was like, this is like modern day rap. And that, like, in his words, George Washington was the Dr. Dre to Hamilton's Eminem. So 1997-ish rap battle. Yeah. So that's kind of what led to him writing this whole play.
Makes a lot of sense. Actually, tying into that, I had a note that, where did I say this? Oh, no, it's my next note. I feel like this is just how Lin-Manuel Miranda thinks, like how, like what you're reading and what you're like seeing there. When he was like in class in history, I think this is probably just how he studied stuff. Like he, a test is coming up, he's studying it and he can't, make sense of the notes, but he suddenly thinks of it as like these guys having this rap battle and they're, making musical. And that's just like how he perceives life and how he learns.
I mean,
things.
I feel like that's how he like makes dinner, does laundry, gets dressed.
It's like just how his mind works. He's just constantly making these like nonstop musical, like with that fast flow, like you see even like within Moana and other Encanto, like everything's kind of happening really fast and to a beat. Just how his mind perceives everything.
100%.
Yeah, and my next note was it's probably also how he studied history. And then my next note was, I wonder if Lin-Manuel does any of the choreography, if he was involved with that at all, or if he was just, writing the story and the words to it and kind of putting it somewhat to a tune, or if he like had a vision in his mind of like what this was going to look like.
I would say specific steps, probably not. But I think having read the biography and like knowing the story, like getting to know the history really well, he probably had a general vision of how he wanted certain stories to be told.
Yeah. I just wonder if it was like, oh, these people are going to be here for this song and here for this, like how, exact he got with that. But then I also wonder, was he the one behind the whole spinning stage concept?
Right. Apparently that was just a pain in the butt for all the actors. They learned one whole, or there was 2 songs that were really hard. Hopeless. Is that what it's called? That one, they learned the whole thing and then they started doing it on the stage and they had to just basically start over from scratch and do it again because to perfectly time all of that, which I can only imagine, good on them.
Right. That was my note was like, it's acting on hard mode, just on that spinning stage. And you can't practice it just in like a studio. You have to be practicing on this spinning stage and like trying to figure out like, oh, where do I need to stand? Like you can't have anything marked on the floor because whole floor spinning and moving. So like trying to get to your spot all the time.
And it's not only just like the one actor who's singing, it's also all the other supporting cast. Plus there's also background dancers. Like there's the actual actors who have speaking roles, but then there's the people in the background and everybody's just weaving and spinning and
there's just like 10 million words a minute that to get through that. I'm like, props to them. I didn't notice
they probably slept real good.
Oh yeah, I'm
every
sure.
night after that, man.
I didn't notice any like big mistakes or really anything with them. I mean, it's hard to follow with so much going on, but I felt like with so much movement and words that you think someone would have stumbled at some point or anything, but very, very well done.
I'm sure it had to happen at some point. You can't be perfect with that.
Yeah. Or from what I've learned from watching or hearing about like stand-up specials for the comedy is that sometimes they might film it on a couple nights, kind of splice it together.
Would you like me to tell my fun fact about it?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So they filmed it, I believe it was 2 live performances that they recorded, and then they also did one without an audience so that they could get all of the dolly shots and the up close shots without the audience. Obviously, they would be in the way with all that. And some of the musical numbers they would do multiple times so they could get certain different angles of different people without the audience. So it was two live shows edited with.
That makes sense. Because also the fact that they said this was filmed in June and they didn't say like June specific date.
That was my first thought when it said just June. I was like, okay, this was definitely multiple shows.
Yeah. So very well done splicing that together because I also didn't notice any transitions.
It's very seamless. And honestly, when we watched it the last time, I would have not ever thought, oh, this was probably multiple shows. I just assumed it was a single take.
Yeah. Now, like, my next note is having watched all of this or rewatched all this, it really makes you want to do a deep dive on the Revolutionary War. We obviously learned a whole lot about it in elementary, middle, high school, but like I said, I didn't really learn anything of Alexander Hamilton and his involvement and all the other stuff going on with the war. We just kind of hear, a couple big main points that are going to be on our, big standardized test. And like, that's about it that I now want to learn, a whole lot more about the strategic initiatives of like not just the battle formations and moving the armies, but also like trying to get everyone to buy into this war and trying to convince people of various things and all of the things we learned about that he was kind of doing behind the scenes of trying to get resources by using his wit and his ability to write to try to convince people to like, oh, we need more resources here for this army so that we can possibly win this war beyond just like, oh, shooting guns, fighting, winning.
Yeah, I'm certain that there's more to it than just, oh, the British won this battle. America won this battle. America won.
Yep, that's all you need to know.
Dumped some tea.
Yep. Crossed the Delaware and won. That's all you hear.
That's it. Revolutionary War summed up.
Yep, SOL's done. So the next note was that I was getting some Pete Davidson vibes from his friend Lawrence, and I guess he also played someone else. The way that character kind of looked like kind of like a young Pete Davidson. Not that I think Pete Davidson would ever really be on a Broadway stage like this.
We'd all love to see it.
He might be on a Broadway stage as a musical someday, but I don't think it'll be about Hamilton. It'll be probably something much similar to Bupkis.
Probably, yes. Bupkis the musical? Oh, Lord. Yeah, I see it. I can see it.
And my next note is that I don't know if it was a particular character or just an extra that I kept seeing that I kept thinking that I was about to see Keegan-Michael Key on some I thought he was going to be in it at some point just based on some people that like from the side or behind that I thought he was going to be in there. And obviously he was not.
There was one character that when he opened his mouth sounded like Keegan-Michael Key. And we both at the same time kind of sat up a little straighter and then he said it out loud and I was like, I was thinking the same thing. Definitely would have been a good fit for him.
The scene where he was having an affair, I guess, and he was like getting caught or sneaking out or something like that. I got some vibes of R. Kelly's Trapped in a Closet series of just trying to like not get caught. My next note being, it's impressive all the various like tempo and style changes throughout there. And I also thought that I was getting some like Encanto vibes from this about how each character kind of had their own like tempo and their melody and their own bit of song that you could kind of hear tied in like later when they would kind of come back for like a little reprise from like one or two lines of that song. It kind of gave more depth to those characters to really see like how they kind of fit in that song and how their theme song like played through in other people's stories. I
also had the note of All of You with a song from Encanto where the Don't Talk About Bruno song comes back and Luisa's song and Isabella's song, how all of those play back into this big group medley song. And I thought the exact same thing. He definitely has a style, Lin-Manuel Miranda.
And it works really well and it's very good. And my final note being that the character that played George Washington, I wasn't too crazy about him the first time I watched through just because he didn't have like the powdered wig and didn't look like the stereotypical George Washington that we always see. I don't think people really think of what Alexander Hamilton looks like that often to really have an opinion. But I thought on this rewatch, I thought he actually did a much better job than I guess I was just a little more looking about how he looked at first. And with this watch through, I thought his commanding presence was really, really good.
I agree. I thought the same thing. I was going to use these same words, commanding presence. He definitely, and I mean, I don't know what the age difference actually is between George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, but he had this maturity to him as well, that and that guiding presence that I appreciated a lot more this time around.
Yeah.
I don't know that I really don't remember watching it much the first time, but I appreciated that this time.
For some reason, I just remember him coming off not as strong and thought he was kind of like a weak character. I'm like, this guy doesn't look like George Washington. It's like they just kind of cast someone to play the role, but it wasn't anything about him. On this rewatch, though, I appreciated him a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He did a good job. I mean, honestly, they all did such a good job just knowing how many lines there are and all the choreography, and not only are they just saying the lines, they're also facially acting as well too. It is very artistically well done. My turn. You're done.
Yep.
My first note is June of 2016. So I didn't realize how far before this was filmed. It's also just crazy thinking that it came out in 2020 and this was filmed 4 years before, but we're watching this at home, not being able to go anywhere, and like hearing the live audience. I remember it being kind of mentally trippy at the time.
It said 2016, but in my mind, both times, I just read it as 2019. That I was like, oh, this was filmed just before Hamilton came out. Like, I'm glad they were able to film this because now everything's shut down for COVID. That it didn't even think to look to see that it was filmed even years before that.
And I had read somewhere that apparently it was supposed to be a theatrical release in March of 2021. So they filmed it in 2016
5 years.
And they're just sitting on it and just decided to release it to Disney Plus during the pandemic. But it was supposed to be another almost year later.
So weird.
I'm not sure what the politics behind all that was, but I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, maybe they needed to like have an agreement to let it run on Broadway for X amount of years to not kind of clubber the sales of the show.
Probably. But I do believe that it was recorded right when the original cast was kind of getting ready to turn it over to the next group. So they wanted to get the recording with everybody that was original to
Makes sense.
My next note is the microphones in the hair. Did you notice it? That if anybody that had longer hair, especially like, Lin-Manuel Miranda's hair is long, it would be like stuck. You could see it. And then the rest of their hair, it was like put over it. And I guess the wire just like runs down the back of their scalp. But I know that they obviously microphones have gotten better, but I remember noticing like bigger microphones on people's foreheads when I went and saw things on Broadway many, many years ago. But they just said it was this very subtle little dot like right in the center of their forehead.
I'm glad you didn't point it out to me because I didn't notice it and I probably wouldn't be able to unsee it.
But
now.
even your mom said something. She was like, oh, I just love trying to see where all their microphones are hidden. And I was like, I've been thinking that too, because they're just stuck right in the middle of their hair. I want to say Eliza's, though, was kind of different because of her side part. It was not, because I kept looking for it because I could see almost everybody else's, but hers was slightly off on her head, but it was really interesting.
No, when you guys said that, I was looking at their clothes and I'm like, man, they must be really well hidden because I don't see them. I didn't even think to look at their forehead.
Yeah. And Aaron Burr, because he was bald, his was an actual microphone. But anybody that had longer hair, it was tucked into their hair. So I'll pull up some Google images for you when we're done. My next note is thank God for subtitles. It's so much story. And I mean, they're not telling just like a week story in 2 hours. They are telling years of story, and they are cramming history, relationships, character development and growth, real human development and growth into this like short 2.5 hours that to actually process it all. I mean, I had to read it. I straight up had to read it.
Yeah. Again, it's one of those things where like Oppenheimer, like you can either make it a really long movie and still like cut a lot of things out, or you can make it like a 10-part miniseries. Still probably leave some stuff out. It's just so much to unpack there that, yeah, obviously you're not going to make a several part theater show, but it's just a whole lot to take in and to try to cover. It's very bold to try to even do that in the first place.
Right. That bold. That's the word that kind of kept coming to me. It's very ambitious too. Yeah,
that's the word.
And then my next note is I love the modern bromance with the was Lawrence, Hamilton, Lafayette, and there was someone else there. Hercules, I think was his name. They were drinking in the bar at the beginning, and they kind of kept coming back to each other and like giving each other a hard time. And it was just this like the hip hop bros. Yeah. But obviously they are characters from the 1700s. So it was just fun to see that modernization of that relationship.
A creative way of kind of covering their actual like relationships and showing like more how it would be in a more modern time, I guess, with that style of ribbing versus what it probably was then.
Definitely. It definitely made me giggle to imagine that obviously they were not being like, hey, bro, what it must have really been like 400 years ago. And my next note, Oppenheimer, I already talked about that. All of you from Encanto. I'm shocked this wasn't one of your notes. Jonathan Groff is the real MVP. One of my notes for my deep dives is that he was only on screen for 9 minutes, but he makes such an impact in those 9 minutes.
9 minutes. It seems like he was on stage for like, I would have said like 4 or 5 minutes, just 3 short songs, but really like steals the show. I mean, obviously he's the only one really singing. It's a bit jarring because he should be all the way across the ocean. So it's mainly just him on the set and singing, but he really just blows out of the water.
And from what I read, it was a character that really taught him how to do a lot with a little, because he's not really moving, doesn't have any choreography. He's on the stage by himself, and he's standing pretty rigid and still, but he is so expressive with his face. I mean, he's spitting like crazy, which is so gross, but I respect that from having to project and
trying to give it his all.
That he's just the real MVP. And so this was it was not a movie. It was a recording of a theater production. And I have a lot of kind of notes about that, because the second it started, almost the way the set was set up with the different levels around the like 3 walls, it was how I mentally imagined Rent being. If it was, because I kept, I mean, the whole time we were watching Rent, I even talked about it in the after show. I was just trying to imagine what the production would look like. And the second the lights came on, the curtain came up, I was like, yeah, that's that similar style, obviously maybe a little more modern since it's New York City, 2000 something, or 1980, I guess. And this was the 1700s, but just that style of set was like, yes, this is what I was imagining from Rent, and just see that actual theater setup.
Crazy because, you know, some plays have like various set pieces where they'll like wheel one set off and one on to kind of show like different settings, but this was basically static the whole time.
There was one little section
tables they brought in
that they would pull out, and then like you said, tables and some other things, but for the most part it was
very static to try to show, you know, that much history and that much going on all in one set, one spinning set, but one set nonetheless.
But I think, you know, the set wasn't necessarily super important. They were telling so much with their dialogue and with their movements and their acting that you didn't need a crazy busy set to establish a lot of that setting. And then on that same note, I liked that it was a filming of a actual theater performance, because then you kind of get the theater perspective. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, I kind of wish that there wasn't all the camera movements. I think my brain would have gotten bored if there wasn't any movement. But I feel like there should also have been an option of this is just straight through.
Yeah, but they wouldn't have been able to combine as seamlessly if they had just one static shot.
I agree. But I think I'm getting this from the perspective of people in the theater. And then all of a sudden it would be a really close up of Lin-Manuel Miranda. And I'm like, okay, this is not a true, authentic theater experience. That part of me kind of wished that there was just a straight, like I'm sitting in the audience, I'm watching from back here kind of perspective. Because honestly, some of the close-ups were really close that it was almost jarring to be like, whoa, why are we so close to your face?
I don't think people would have realized that Jonathan Groff was spitting as much if they didn't come super close into him as he was spitting. Yeah,
I read that somewhere, is that the close-up shots brought to light some things that are kind of gross, but also I do think your brain would get really bored for something that's that long when you're at home in the comfort of your own house without any of the switching of perspectives.
Because even when you're sitting in the seats in the theater, you can kind of look around a little bit and, you know, see a bit more. You're not just like literally your head locked in like that, just staring straight ahead. So to do that would be kind of hard. And probably like you said, kind of get your brain, your eyes would get kind of tired after a while.
Definitely.
But it would be kind of cool for an option to have like now with the like new Apple Vision Pro thing, whatever, to be like, oh, I'm sitting here in Hamilton and I'm able to look around and choose who I'm going to, you know, look at.
That would be pretty cool. I'm sure it'll come one day. It's only 2023. Life is young. All right, so that's it for my like in movie notes, but I did do a little bit. I watched a couple behind the scenes YouTube videos and read a couple things, so I just have a couple notes. I would like to say that my slept on it score does go up a little bit. I knew that there was a lot that went into it artistically, but really reading a lot of the stuff, I think I'll bump it up to a 5.6. I still don't quite understand the hype of why everybody waits in line hours and hours and spends hundreds and hundreds and thousands of dollars to go see it. But it's a work of art for sure. So I kind of mentioned this. It is based on the 2004 biography of Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow. And basically Lin-Manuel Miranda was in the airport and he was looking for something to read and stumbled on that book and was 2 chapters in and started Googling. Was like, someone has to have made this into a hip hop musical already. That's
the first reaction anyone has to anything.
I was watching an interview and whoever was interviewing him was like, that was your first thought 2 chapters
like I
in?
said, that's how his mind works.
Obviously someone's turned this into a hip hop musical, and luckily they hadn't because he was able to create it.
Like, I'm sure the dude's like probably like, cooking in the kitchen, reading a recipe, and it's somehow like setting that to a beat. And
I'm sure
everything just happens, has to go like that for his mind.
But then, so it had not been turned into a hip hop musical and he started working on it. And eventually the author of that autobiography, Ron Chernow, became the historical advisor.
Author of that biography.
Yes. He became the historical advisor for the play. So he was able to help him fact check everything and make sure it all makes sense. Because if you think about it, he reads this book, writes a full musical like with that rhymes and raps and tells this whole story in 2.5 hours, but also has to make sure that the story is able to be told in that rhyming pattern and is factually accurate. It hurts my brain.
I'm sure as the guy was writing that biography, he's like, hopefully someone picks this up someday and makes this into a hip hop musical.
Oh man. And then it took him 7 years to write it and get everything together, which obviously makes sense when you think about how much
it makes
facts.
it feel a little more human.
Yes. How much facts is in it, getting all the songs, like writing the music for it, writing all the lyrics, casting people, choreography, all of that stuff. So it premiered in theaters in Broadway theaters, not movie theaters, on January 20th, 2015. So sometime about a year and a half later, they recorded this for TV at some point. Yeah. And the question that you've been waiting for. Hi, I know how many words of dialogue are in the show. Do you want to make a guess?
I wouldn't even know where to begin because I'm like let me do some rough quick math. So it's 161 minutes, and then multiply that by 60 to how many seconds. And if I'm thinking on an average, I'm going to say 25,000 words.
Less. 20,500 words of dialogue.
Man, I overshot it.
So it is that average. So it's 20,500 words of dialogue. That might be an about number. I was listening and trying to type it out. And that turns out to be 144 words per minute. And for Daveed Diggs, who played Lafayette and Jefferson, he talked so fast and rapped so fast that it was 200 words a minute for him. And his fastest rate clocks in at 6.3 words per second during one of the songs.
Man.
6 words in a second.
I'm sure it's far from the world record, but still.
I don't understand. It's incredible. And that if this play was performed at the rate of an average play, it would take somewhere between 4 and 6 hours to sit through. And I believe it.
100%.
So that if for anybody wondering about all the facts and figures on dialogue and rate, it was that. King was only on screen for 9 minutes. I already talked about that. And I talked about the different dolly shots. So that's pretty much it.
Cool. Do we want to do a quick recap of the season for season finale?
Sure.
So I don't think we have anything really prepared for this. But we can
flying by the seat of our pants.
Go through, and I guess we'll pick our favorite and least favorite and give some thoughts. So let's start. So our season, for those who didn't catch every episode, we covered Singing in the Rain, Oklahoma, Grease, Chicago, The Music Man, Rent, Hairspray, Once, and Hamilton. So of those, what would you say was your least favorite?
Oklahoma.
Really? I think you liked Music Man. I was going to say Music Man, followed by probably Singing in the Rain, which was okay. I just think I liked a lot of the other ones a lot better.
Honestly, I would say Oklahoma followed by Grease were my least favorite. I didn't love Singing in the Rain, but I did think the storyline of the behind the scenes of Hollywood was interesting. I liked that, especially seeing it, it came out in like 50 something, that to to see that in that time period was interesting, especially coming off film noir. It's not something that I'm going to watch a gajillion times. Have I been singing the songs from it? Not really. But
yeah,
I just don't like Grease very much.
Yeah, I was honestly surprised by Singing in the Rain. It was like you said, it was different than, I guess, or it was kind of cool for what it was. I think it just felt so different from almost everything else that we watched in some ways to me.
It was very different.
And obviously it was the oldest one by probably a good amount too. Which one was, so let's see, which one was which one was worse than you expected? Which one was better than you expected of any movies?
I guess Grease was worse than I expected. I knew it was not a favorite of mine, but I don't love the story. I don't really even love the songs. I don't think it's a very cohesively told story either. I don't know.
I get why people kind of like some of the catchy, upbeat songs to it. But yeah, I think that's probably also my pick for worse than I expected. For better than I expected, I'm going to go with Rent. I think that was way better in my mind than I expected.
I'm going to go with Once. And I think, like, we've seen it before, but to watch it again from this critical eye perspective, which I have grown to really appreciate, just appreciating the artistry that they took with it and how well crafted it was and put together for something that was shot onto like cheap hand cameras, and that like the story was actually so beautiful. I don't know. I think that was my surprise.
Yeah. I think for my probably favorite of the season, I'm also going to go with Rent again for probably my favorite one that I watched, mainly because I hadn't seen it before, didn't know what to expect. And I kind of want to go back and honestly watch it again. There was,
watch it again.
It was a lot different of a subject than I was expecting, but ended up being pretty good.
I mean, if you watched the Hairspray episode, you know that I love that movie. Oh God, I already can't talk about it.
I think that's probably your pick for
I
favorite.
do, but I also love Chicago. Love Chicago. Rent was a surprise up there. I mean, but Hairspray to me gives the most like musical, like the bright colors and the catchy dances and the hair and the makeup, and I love that one so much. So I mean, I think that one has to be my favorite. I think Chicago and Rent are probably close second.
And I guess for some final like thoughts on the season, my biggest takeaway was just the breadth of the subjects that they kind of covered in some of these musicals, and just how heavy of a subject they were able to make into not necessarily like a lighthearted, but a almost catchy in a way, a musical and songs to it, like covered some things.
I mean, if you think of almost all of these are pretty deep stuff.
Like Grease, being pregnant in high school was kind of the main context of the original Grease, at least.
And dropping out of high school, like not light stuff.
Chicago, being
murder trial.
Yeah, a murder trial.
The Music Man is a con man.
Yeah, a con man. Rent being about like the HIV/AIDS pandemic, and also just like not being able to live and survive on low rent in New York City. Just
segregation. And racial discrimination in Hairspray.
Yeah.
And also, I don't know that we actually talked about this, but just that like Tracy was not the typical beauty girl that, also, looking different in all kinds of ways in Hairspray.
And then Singing in the Rain kind of showing the, I guess, historical, the history of music, or the history of movies as they gained sound.
True.
Like,
I forgot.
had that whole aspect of it. Was kind of a subject that I was not expecting to be covered in that first one. I thought, at least that one, and probably most of them, I thought were just going to be kind of some silly love stories, and there was so much more going on to almost all of them than just a typical love story.
Ended up being more period pieces about tough stuff than lovey-dovey singing in the rain. That was just a quick little side story.
People kind of think of like, oh, it's just a silly musical, like some of the, I guess, Disney musicals that you kind of think of everything's happy and great, and trying to get the guy or get the girl. Very different from a lot of these movies that we saw.
I also think one of my big takeaways from this too was how many musicals there are. I was like, oh, an 8-episode or 9-episode season, like we'll probably cover most of the big ones. But as we were making our list, I was like, oh my God, there are so many that I've seen before that I want to see again, and there's so many that I haven't seen that I wanted to see, that it was hard to cut it.
Yeah, a ton to cover for sure.
Yeah. So I'm definitely excited to circle back on musicals. I'm sure it'll probably be a while, unfortunately.
Yeah,
but
I need a little bit of a break from all the musicals.
Yes. Well,
my mind does not work like Lin-Manuel Miranda's. I can't just be in musical mode all the time.
Definitely. I mean, mine's in musical mode a lot, but not to that extent for sure. But I definitely feel cultured. Do you feel cultured in musicals?
Yeah, definitely. I loved a lot of these that I got to see, and there's also still a ton more that I still want to see.
I also think we did a good job of, like you said, kind of getting a range of decades and types of musicals. I mean, the way a lot of these were told was really different, that I think we did a good job of picking stuff. So with that, I think it's time for our next season. Season 4 will be coming probably in 2 to 3 weeks. And we are doing sci-fi. We have a starting list of movies, but if you have any sci-fi suggestions, favorites, send them our way, leave them in the comments. Email us at culturenightpod@gmail.com and we'll add them to our list. And stay tuned on Instagram to see when we will be making our return to podcast. It probably will only be a couple weeks, but if you want to stay in the loop, follow us on Instagram at culturenightpod and on YouTube at culturenightpod. And with that, catch you next time.